Dear students, good morning to all. Today we are discussing about another theorem of subgroups. This is very important theorem. Statement. The union of two subgroups of a group G is subgroup of G if and only if one is contained in other, or if H1, H2 be two subgroups of a group G, then H1 union H2 is subgroup of G if and only if H1 is contained in H2 or H2 is contained in H1. Proof. Statement lo H1, H2 be two subgroups of group G. We prove that H1 union H2 is subgroup of G if and only if H1 is contained in H2 or H2 is contained in H1. If and condition కాబట్టి necessary sufficient యూజ్ చేసుకుంటాం. Necessary condition లో let H1 union H2 be subgroup of G. We prove that H1 is contained in H2 or H2 is contained in H1. ఇక్కడ కాండక్షన్ ప్రాసెస్ యూజ్ చేసుకుంటాం. అంటే సపోజ్ H1 is does not contain in H2 and H2 does not contain in H1. H1 does not contain in H2 and H2 does not contain in H1. If H1 does not contain in H2 implies if there exists an element A. ఇక్కడ A అనే ఎలిమెంట్ ఎగ్జిస్ట్ అవుతుంది such that A belongs to H1 and A does not belongs to H2. If H2 does not contain in H1 implies if there exists an element B such that B does not belongs to H1 and B belongs to H2. Since A belongs to H1 union H2, B belongs to H1 union H2 implies A into B belongs to H1 union H2. ఇక్కడ H1 union H2 is subgroup లో క్లోజర్ కండిషన్ సాటిస్ఫై అవుతుంది కాబట్టి ఇక్కడ H1 union H2 be a subgroup of G అని తీసుకున్నాం. క్లోజర్ కండిషన్ నుంచి A belongs to H1 union H2, B belongs to H1 union H2 implies AB belongs to H1 union H2. Therefore AB belongs to H1 union H2 అంటే AB belongs to H1 or AB belongs to H2. AB అనేది H1 లో అయినా ఉంటుంది, H2 లో అయినా ఉంటుంది. If AB belongs to H1 తీసుకున్నాం అనుకోండి, if AB belongs to H1, since A belongs to H1 implies H1 is a subgroup, inverse property satisfied, A inverse belongs to H1. Now A inverse belongs to H1, AB belongs to H1 implies A inverse into AB belongs to H1. A inverse into AB అంటే A inverse into A E అంటే B belongs to H1. B belongs to H1. కానీ ఇక్కడ B does not belongs to H1. It is contradiction. అంటే AB does not belongs to H1. Since B does not belongs to H1. B does not belongs to H1. అలాగే if AB belongs to H2. AB belongs to H2 since B belongs to H2 implies B inverse belongs to H2. Now, AB belongs to H2. B inverse belongs to H2 implies AB B inverse belongs to H2. This implies A B B inverse ante E ante A dot E A belongs to H2. ఇక్కడ A అనేది belongs to H2 అనేసి ఇక్కడ A does not belongs to H2. So it is conduction. అంటే AB does not belongs to H2 since A does not belongs to H2. ఇక్కడ AB అనేది H1 అయినా ఉండాలి లేదా H2 అయినా ఉండాలి. ఇక్కడ AB belongs to H1 conduction వచ్చింది, అలాగే AB belongs to H2 conduction వచ్చింది. కాబట్టి therefore our supposition is wrong. Supposition ఏం తీసుకున్నాం? Suppose H1 does not contain H2 and H2 does not contain H1 తీసుకోవడం అనేది wrong. కాబట్టి therefore H1 is contained in H2 or H2 contained in H1. This is necessary condition. Once again repeat this necessary condition. Let H1 union H2 be subgroup of group G. We prove that H1 is contained in H2 or H2 is contained in H1. Conduction process use చేసుకుంటే suppose H1 is does not contain in H2 and H2 does not contain in H1. First condition, if H1 does not contain in H1 implies if there exists an element A such that A belongs to H1 and A does not belongs to H2. అందువల్ల ఇక్కడ H1 is does not contain in H2 కాబట్టి A belongs to H1 and A does not belongs to H2. If H2 does not contain in H1 implies if there exists an element B such that B does not belongs to H1, B does not belongs to H2. Since A belongs to H1 union H2, B belongs to H1 union H2 implies AB belongs to H1 union H2. AB belongs to H1 union H2 అంటే AB belongs to H1 or AB belongs to H2. If AB belongs to H1, since A belongs to H1 implies A inverse belongs to H1. H1 is subgroup inverse property. Now A inverse belongs to H1, AB belongs to H1 implies A inverse into AB belongs to H1. A inverse into AB అంటే B belongs to H1. కానీ B does not belongs to H1 కాబట్టి AB does not belongs to H1. AB belongs to H2. Since B belongs to H2 implies B inverse belongs to H2. AB belongs to H2, B inverse belongs to H2 implies AB B inverse belongs to H2. B inverse E కాబట్టి A belongs to H2. కానీ A does not belongs to H2. It is conduction. And AB does not belongs to H2. Our supposition is wrong. Therefore, H1 is contained in H2 or H2 is contained in H1. Sufficient condition. Sufficient condition లో let H1 is contained in H2 or H2 is contained in H1 తీసుకుని we prove that H1 union H2 is subgroup of G. H1 union H2 is subgroup of G. First, if H1 is contained in H2 అంటే H1 లో ఎలిమెంట్స్ అన్ని కూడా H2 లో ఉంటాయి. అప్పుడు H1 union H2 ఈక్వల్ టు H2 అవుతుంది. ఏ సబ్సెట్ ఆఫ్ B అయితే ఏలో ఉన్న ఎలిమెంట్స్ అన్ని కూడా B లో ఉంటాయి. అదేవిధంగా H1 union H2 ఈక్వల్ టు H2. H2 subgroup కాబట్టి H1 union H2 is also subgroup. H1 union H2 is subgroup of G. If H2 is contained in H1, H2 is contained in H1. H1 union H2 equal to H2 లో ఉన్న ఎలిమెంట్స్ అన్ని కూడా H1 లో ఉంటాయి. H1 లో ఎక్కువ ఎలిమెంట్స్ ఉంటాయి కాబట్టి H1 is union H2 equal to H1. H1 is subgroup statement is ఉంటుంది. H1 subgroup అయితే H1 union H2 is also subgroup. H1 union H2 is subgroup of G. This is sufficient condition. Let H1 is contained in H2 or H2 is contained in H1. We prove that H1 union H2 is subgroup of G. If H1 is contained in H2 అయితే H1 union H2 equal to H2. H2 subgroup, H1 union H2 is also subgroup. If H2 is contained in H1, H1 union H2 equal to H1. H1 is subgroup, H1 union H2 is also subgroup. Thank you.